Today, we're going to talk about a web library that for a time was basically the secret engine behind some of the biggest websites on the planet, but you might not even recognize its name today. This is the story of Polymer, and trust me, its legacy is way more important than you might think.
So let's just start with a quick question. Think about YouTube, Netflix, and that beautiful redesign of Google Earth. I mean, these are massive platforms, right? You've probably used at least one of them today. But what's the one piece of technology that actually ties them all together?
You guessed it, the answer is Polymer. And look at this list. It's not just a few tech companies. We're talking YouTube, Netflix, Google, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, IBM. This was a powerhouse. This wasn't some little niche tool. It was at the very heart of the modern web.
So here's the twist. If Polymer was so huge, so successful, why does its own website now say it's in maintenance mode? And why do they recommend a totally different tool for new projects? To figure that out, we've got to go back to the very beginning.
Okay, so to really get what Polymer was all about, you first have to understand the problem it was trying to fix. And that whole story starts with an idea called web components.
The dream behind web components was honestly a game changer. The idea was, what if you could create your very own HTML tags? So instead of just being stuck with the basics, like paragraphs and divs, you could build your own, say, product card, or a fully functional video player. A totally self-contained little unit, with all its own logic and style, that you could just drop into any project you wanted.
There was just one tiny problem. Trying to build these things with plain vanilla JavaScript was, well, it was a nightmare. The code was super complex and just so verbose. But this is where Polymer came in and offered this really clean solution. It brought in cool features like data binding, which meant your data and your user interface were always in sync, automatically. It just handled all that messy, repetitive code for you. And that was Polymer's whole mission, really, to take this incredibly complex process and make it feel as simple and intuitive as snapping together Lego blocks. It was all about creating a system that was structured, reusable, and just plain easy to work with.
So, with an idea that powerful, you can bet Polymer took off. It was backed by Google, and it pretty quickly became this major force in the web development world. This was its golden age.
And the momentum just built like crazy. Development started in 2013, and by 2015, they had their first production-ready version out the door. That really lit a fire. You started seeing major developer conferences all over Europe, and it led to these huge, landmark projects, like that absolutely stunning 2017 redesign of Google Earth, all built with Polymer. So what made that 1.0 release such a big deal? Simple: performance. The early versions had some speed bumps, but the team just crushed those problems, making it a whopping 7 times faster. That was the magic key that really unlocked its widespread adoption.
So Polymer is at the absolute height of its popularity. It has a thriving community, massive companies are using it, and then the team behind it did something nobody really saw coming. They decided it was time to evolve. And that brings us to the big pivot. Yep, in 2018, the game changed. The team put out this roadmap update that basically signaled a huge shift in their whole strategy. Now, they weren't killing Polymer, not at all, but they were definitely steering the ship in a completely new direction.
So what was this big shift? Well, the team decided to move away from some of Polymer's heavier features, like its own special templating system and something called two-way data binding. Now, two-way binding was powerful, but in a really big app, it could make it super hard to figure out how your data was changing. The new goal was to be simpler, faster, and stick closer to the web's native standards. All that effort got refocused into a brand new, super lightweight library called Lit Element, the lean, modern successor to Polymer.
Which, brings us right back to our original question. If Polymer was basically replaced by Lit, does that mean it was a failure? Or did it leave behind something important? Let's break down its real impact.
Polymer's influence is just undeniable. It took this big, abstract idea of web components and made it a real, practical tool that thousands of developers could actually use. By doing that, it pushed all the browser makers to get better at supporting these standards natively. But the most important thing? Its philosophy didn't just disappear, it evolved. Every lesson the team learned from Polymer was poured directly into its successor, Lit.
So the real takeaway here is pretty clear. Polymer wasn't a failure, not even close. It was a hugely successful experiment that did its job perfectly. Think of it as a bridge, getting us from an older way of building websites to the modern component-driven future we have now. It was an absolutely critical stepping stone. And that leaves us with one final thought, right? The story of Polymer is really the story of how technology evolves. A great idea comes along, it serves its purpose, it teaches us all some really valuable lessons, and then it makes way for the next, even better idea. It really makes you wonder, what tools that you and I use every single day are just a stepping stones for whatever comes next.